Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are diving into something really thought-provoking. It's a piece of writing that gets right to the heart of what it means to be prepared, especially when, the world wasn't really built for how your brain works.
Mm-hmm.
Our source for this deep dive is a Substack post by Jaime Hoerricks, Ph.D. It's titled, Training in Public, Why I Write So Much. And our mission today is to really unpack Jaime's central idea. It's about this deep, often invisible link between, training and performance.
Right.
And how that plays out specifically for neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
And why, for some, writing isn't just communicating, it's more like fundamental preparation.
Exactly. Jaime talks about this immense unseen labor that's needed just to appear, quote, fluent in professional spaces. Spaces that weren't really designed with minds like theirs in mind.
Yeah, and it all seems to kick off from this really striking visual Jaime saw, a graphic comparing training cycles.
Yes, the graph.
Okay, so I saw this graphic described in the post, and it immediately grabbed me too. It shows two timelines side by side. The top one is for professional athletes, and you see these big, distinct blocks of color. Teal for training, red for performance.
Right. Clear separation.
Yeah, Jaime notes there's this visible, almost like rhythmic pattern, train, perform. It's explicit. It's, part of the plan.
Right. And then the contrast is the timeline below it, labeled incorporate.
Right.
And that line, it's almost entirely red, just continuous performance.
Yeah.
With this tiny little sliver of teal, like right near the end. And it's wryly labeled that one training day.
Yeah.
It's definitely a caricature, but, a pretty sharp one. Captures how modern work can feel like just endless output with no real time built in for preparation.
Yeah, it really resonates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is Jaime's reaction. They saw themselves in it instantly, but not just as like a critique of corporate burnout.
No, it went deeper for them.
Right. For them, it captured what they call the impossible architecture of autistic professionalism.
Wow. That phrase alone, impossible architecture, that's powerful.
It really is. And Jaime says navigating that, it relies heavily on illusion, translation, and exhaustion.
Illusion, translation, and exhaustion. I mean, that completely reframes what we might just see as being professional or, good at your job.
Totally.
It makes it sound like this constant, exhausting act of construction, building something that doesn't come naturally.
Exactly. Which leads us right to this question. Jaime apparently gets asked a lot. They say sometimes it's admiring, but often it's kind of tinged with mild disbelief, perhaps, or suspicion. People ask them, why I write so much?
Right. And the answer they give, which is really the core of the whole post, it's profound but simple. I write because it is how I train.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What does training actually mean here?
Yeah.
Because it's not just like drafting an email or practicing a speech, is it?
No, not at all. Jaime clarifies this training is much more foundational. They describe it as how I locate my thoughts, how I rehearse social meaning, how I translate the contours of my internal world into a language others can hear.
Okay, translate the contours of my internal world. That's key.
Yes, and they explain why that translation is so incredibly crucial and so difficult. Their internal language, it isn't English. It isn't even verbal in the way most people think of it.
Right.
It moves, they say, through shapes and echoes, patterns and pulses. Ideas arrive as gestalts, these whole concepts, already fused with emotion, sensory input, memory.
So taking that intricate internal world and pulling it into linear English.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like more than just translation.
Yeah, they say it's like disassembly, taking apart something complex and trying to rebuild it with a completely different, maybe less suited toolkit.
Disassembly. That's intense.
And they use this really striking, almost visceral description of English. They call it the sewer drain of language. Functional, flattening, a vessel that leaks meaning.
Wow. That image really sticks with you. Leaks meaning.
It really does. And it adds another layer when Jaime mentions English is actually their third language, and they kind of joke that neurotypicality is perhaps their fifth language to navigate.
Right. Makes sense.
They even talk about building explicit script libraries in Spanish for students and families they work with. They see that scripting as necessary for coherence and reciprocity.
For meeting one another intact.
Exactly. It just underscores how much deliberate, conscious effort can go into communication that others might just do without thinking.
Which brings us right back to that idea of the unseen labor. So what looks polished on the outside, that perfectly phrased email or a comment in a meeting that just seems to effortlessly thread the needle.
Yeah.
Jaime reveals that's usually the product of hours and hours of this hidden work, this
Right.
training.
And they give really concrete examples, don't they?
Yeah, like staying up late, drafting possible questions for a conversation that might happen tomorrow.
Or scrolling back through old emails just to try and predict someone's likely tone.
Mentally rehearsing phrases over and over. Imagining all the branching paths a conversation could take depending on different responses.
It sounds exhausting just listing it.
Right. And Shamey is crystal clear about this. This isn't optional. It's not like extra credit work.
No, they say. This is the work behind the work, and it is not optional.
And there's actually a term for this, right? Used within some neurodivergent communities.
Yes, especially among autistic professionals, particularly those who are also ADHD or Gestalt language processors. They call it the autism tax.
The autism tax. Okay, how does Jaime define that based on the source?
Well, it's basically all those extra hours you have to put in just to appear competent by neurotypical standards. It's the huge emotional toll of constantly having to script your life in what feels like a non-native language or communication style.
Right.
And it's also the delayed costs, the burnout, the sheer exhaustion that comes later from navigating environments just not designed for how your brain processes things.
It creates this really painful paradox, doesn't it? Jaime talks about getting praise for their poise, their preparation, their ability to handle complexity.
Yeah, the irony.
Right.
The irony.
All without anyone realizing that this massive amount of preparation is the only thing stopping them from, in their words, falling apart in those very situations.
So the very thing enabling the performance is totally invisible, hidden.
Exactly. The audience doesn't see the scaffolding.
Which loops us back perfectly to why the writing is so critical for Jaime. Like we said, it is the training that makes the performance possible.
It's that essential pre-processing, building those future scripts, trying to distill the ineffable into something holdable for other people.
Yeah, holdable. That's a good way to put it.
So, someone might look at the sheer volume of Jaime's writing, like a really long reflective post or a super detailed email response, and think, why? Why spend all that time?
Why write 2,000 words when a bullet list might do, kind of thing.
Exactly. Why craft this whole detailed response when maybe 3 lines would technically suffice?
Oh. And James' answer is just so direct and powerful, they say, because this is how I keep myself safe.
Safety, not just clarity, but safety.
Yeah. And they connect it back to their childhood. They learned this strategy young. As a horribly bullied child, James writes that safety was never about authenticity. It was about survival.
Wow.
And that experience taught them to script before I learned to speak freely, taught them how to translate the unspeakable into something tolerable to others.
That background, it makes so much sense of why this preparation isn't just about professional polish. It really is about fundamental safety.
Absolutely. Jaime explains that when they're put on the spot, cornered in a meeting, interrupted, asked to improvise complex thoughts in real time, they cannot simply call up clarity on demand, not without cost, not without consequence.
So the writing, done beforehand, is the training.
It's the training that allows them to survive, to function in environments that, frankly, do not accommodate lag. Training for conversations that maybe do not allow silence. Rehearsing professionalism in what feels very much like a tongue not my own.
It really throws into sharp relief this profound mismatch, doesn't it, between that need and how so many workplaces, or schools even, are set up.
Totally. As Jaime describes it, these environments often expect constant on-demand performance. Preparation gets treated like an afterthought.
And reflection, that's seen as a luxury item.
Right. The expectation is just execute, adapt, respond now, in real time, with poise.
Yeah.
And James concludes often, there is no training arc. There's only performance, just the red line.
And that model, Jaime argues pretty convincingly, is just unsustainable, especially for people whose communication isn't linear, whose internal language arises in constellations rather than lines.
So what happens? What's the outcome if the system doesn't provide the training you need?
Well, Jaime says, so we train ourselves.
You have to build it yourself.
Exactly. If the system won't give you the teal blocks, you have to carve them out yourself.
How? Through the writing, as we've discussed. Through mapping out possibilities, building these huge internal archives of past interactions, potential scripts.
Learning to preempt not just the content of questions, but even the tone.
Yeah. Learning, as Jaime puts it so well, to seem competent by becoming linguists of our own delay.
Linguists of our own delay. That's another phrase that just stops you.
It really does. Which leads right into this central paradox Jaime identifies. This is the part that, for me, really makes you pause and think.
What's that?
The more fluent we appear, the more invisible the labor becomes.
Ah, yes, that hits hard.
Doesn't it? When Jamie speaks well, people just assume they're neurotypical. No big deal.
Right. Or when the writing flows smoothly, people assume, oh, that must have been easy for them.
Exactly. Or when they advocate clearly for themselves or for others, the assumption is they must be fine, that there's no struggle happening underneath that calm surface.
But what stays completely hidden is all that work we've been talking about.
Right. The quiet mornings spent writing out potential dialogue for conversations that might never even happen.
The myriad drafts it takes to boil down a complex constellation of thought into one concise sentence.
That constant, exhausting inner negotiation between sensory overload and verbal response, between emotional knowing and linguistic translation.
So the reality, as Jamie lays it out, it's pretty stark. The fluency, the competence people see.
It exists only because we've trained.
And we've trained only because we've had to.
Mm-hmm. It's a necessity born from a mismatch.
Thinking back to that initial graphic again, the athlete versus corporate one, seeing it through Jamie's lens now, it reveals so much more than just, the inefficiency of that one training day.
It's deeper.
It exposes this whole layer of collective exhaustion, and not just for neurodivergent people, really, but for everyone expected to just perform constantly without pause.
Absolutely. It makes you see how systems that only reward the output, only the visible performance, the red, they effectively punish the process. They punish the essential preparation, the teal, that has to happen behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Tammy mentions seeing colleagues burning out, not because they don't care, but because they've never been given time to prepare for the care they're expected to give.
Oof. That's powerful, too, preparing for care.
Right. And that whole critique leads Jaime to ask this really crucial question for the future. It's one that definitely lingers after you read the piece.
Which is?
What would it mean to flip the model?
Flip the model. Okay. What does that look like in their vision?
Well, they imagine workplaces, schools, systems where training isn't some optional add-on, but is genuinely integrated into the core cycle of work and learning.
Okay.
Where things like reflection, scripting, rehearsal, even, yes, deliberate moments of silence or processing time, where those are valued, seen as essential forms of professional intelligence.
Not dismissed as weakness or delay.
Exactly. Not seen as problems to be fixed, but as valid, valuable ways of working.
So using that graphics imagery again, it's like asking, what if we deliberately built in more teal?
Yes. What if there was just more teal? Jaime imagines that world as, well, quieter, slower maybe, more humane.
A place where the kind of extensive writing they do wouldn't be seen as weird or excessive.
Right, but as a necessary, accepted part of the work for those who need it.
A place where autistic professionals and others who need different kinds of processing time are actually supported in making their work sustainable.
Instead of just being applauded for how well they manage to hide the immense effort it takes them to survive the current system, where training is put back where it belongs, honored as the center.
That's a compelling vision, a more teal world.
It is. But, Jaime is also realistic. Until that systemic shift happens.
Until then,
no, they just continue to write, not because they have tons of free time or some kind of superhuman discipline, but because they are always training, always preparing for the constant flow of interactions that make up their professional and maybe personal life.
And they use that beautiful metaphor, writing is how they build the bridge.
Yes, the bridge between the world I carry inside and the world I am asked to serve.
Such a powerful image.
And they add this final thought that really crystallizes the whole thing. If that bridge looks, from the outside, polished, sturdy, even elegant, it's only because every stone was laid by hand, in the quiet, long before I was called upon to cross it.
Wow, every stone laid by hand, in the quiet. That emphasizes the unseen labor again perfectly.
Mm-hmm. And they draw that direct parallel to their past as an athlete. Remember the athlete timeline.
The training blocks.
All those podiums, the championships. Jaime says it happened because I showed up over and over for the training, the teal parts.
So the arena changed from sports to professional life.
But that fundamental discipline of training, of showing up for the preparation, the writing, has not changed for them. It's still essential.
It's also probably worth mentioning, just for context and respect, as Amy shares this in their writing, their name is pronounced J-A-Me.
Right, J-A-Me, and pronouns they, them, there. Good to note.
So, okay, wrapping up this deep dive into Jaime Hoerricks' post, I think the core takeaway is really clear, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
This often invisible work of preparation, especially things like writing for someone like Jaime, It isn't some secondary task. It's not optional.
No, it's fundamental training.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's especially crucial for neurodivergent individuals who are trying to navigate systems built on very different assumptions about how fast we should process, how we should communicate.
It just starkly highlights this tension, doesn't it? This like mismatch between systems demanding constant, immediate output,
Well read.
all read, and the very real diverse human needs for different kinds of preparation, processing, and yeah, training. The teal.
It really does make you stop and think about the teal and the red in your own life or maybe in your workplace, right?
Definitely. Where is that essential training or reflection or preparation maybe being overlooked, undervalued, invisible?
And then the bigger question Jamie leaves us with,
Yeah.
how might actually recognizing and supporting those diverse ways of processing, actively building in more teal, how might that fundamentally change our whole understanding of what competence even looks like?
And could it help us create environments that are more sustainable and frankly just more humane for absolutely everyone?
Yeah, it's definitely something to reflect on long after this deep dive.
Oh.
A lot to chew on there.